When we talk about growing pessimism in America, you have to start with the situation in Iran. Before this week, we had conducted 9 surveys measuring approval of the situation there, the fighting, the war, and it was always around 40%. The very first day the bombings began, 40% were in favor. And in the total of 9 surveys that we did, it never really budged more than a point or so from that until yesterday. The numbers that we got in yesterday show a 5% drop in support for the action in Iran. It's down to 35%. Significantly, there's a 9 percentage point drop among Republicans. Now, most Republicans still support it, but the enthusiasm is coming down. 57% of voters now are opposed to the action. That's a new high. Related to that, only 22% of voters now tell us their personal finances are getting better. That's the lowest number since Donald Trump won the election in 2024. 35% say their finances are getting worse. Obviously, tied to gas prices, tied to uncertainty about the war. Just as obviously, if these numbers continue into November, it's going to be a very ugly situation for the Republicans with the midterm elections. And by the way, not surprisingly, the pessimism about Iran, the pessimism about the economy is beginning to drag down the president's job approval in a significant way. You know, we release our updates every Friday, but I've looked at the first couple of surveys we've run for this week's numbers, and we're probably going to be reporting a new low in the president's job approval. One of the things, I guess this is the reality that President Trump has recognized. There is no popular support for a long and ongoing engagement in Iran. That's why he's going to be giving an address to the nation tonight. It's why he's beginning to talk about being out of the situation in 2 to 3 weeks, why Secretary Hegseth is saying that we have some decisive actions coming. I am not a military strategist. I am not going to comment on that. What I can say is the biggest impact on the way people feel about this will come from the question of what happens to oil prices. If gas prices begin to come down in a month or so and continue to move downward over the next 6 months, people will feel much better about their personal finances, and the Republican electoral prospects for the midterms will be up significantly. One other aspect, I saw this morning the UAE wants to get involved and wants to step up. If President Trump is seen to have gotten some of our allies to step up and shoulder a portion of the burden, that will be seen as a big victory as well. The very first poll that I ever conducted way back in the late 80s, one of the 2 topics back then was our NATO alliance. And what we saw back in the 80s was a weariness among the American public. They thought our European allies were taking advantage of it. This is not something that Donald Trump has created, but it is a topic he's bringing up. Now, moving on to the minimum wage. This is a debate people have been having for a long time. Does raising the minimum wage reduce the number of entry-level jobs? Liberals tend to say no. Conservatives tend to say yes. When we ask voters overall, 42% say yes, it reduces the number of jobs. 34% disagree. Not surprisingly, there's a partisan divide on that. Republicans say it does cut jobs. Democrats disagree. It's not just about the policy, though, and its outcome. It's about what should our goals be that has created a partisan divide. When we ask overall what's more important, 44% of voters, including most Democrats, say our goal should be to raise the wage. That's more important than creating more jobs. Republicans and 43% of all voters take the opposite view. They think we need to create more jobs, get people into the job market. So we have a disagreement here, not just about the policy outcome, but also about what should the policy objective be. And in a situation like this is a great example of why the most important question in politics is who decides. And on this, we find that 57% of voters say it's not a federal issue. Minimum wage should be set by state and local governments. And, let's face it, there's some common sense to the fact that cost of living is different all over the country. If you live in Manhattan, your cost of living is a whole lot different than if you live in rural Tennessee. Perhaps even more important than the logic of that decision making and tying it to those local things, if we have lots of states experimenting, we'll find ways to learn from each other and get the policy right. But when you shift the focus from what should the policy be to who decides, something else happens. Republicans and Democrats agree. A majority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans believe the decision about the minimum wage should be made at the state and local level, not the federal level. Finally, on the topic of election integrity, you've heard all the numbers around the SAVE Act and how people want to see photo ID and all kinds of things like that. I want to focus on a different aspect of the debate. Right now, only 34% of voters, 1 out of 3 voters, are very confident that the votes have been properly counted and the right person declared the winner over recent elections. When Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, most Democrats thought that he wasn't the legitimate winner. They thought that Hillary Clinton was. When Donald Trump lost in 2020, Republicans had that view. We live in a nation where the government derives its only legitimate authority from the consent of the governed. In a society like that, in a nation with such founding beliefs, it is vitally important that we restore confidence in our system of elections. Now, most people say the simplest and best way to do that, the best way to improve trust will be to require photo ID requirements. And that's a great step. But I want to be clear, it's not going to be one piece of legislation. This is going to require an ongoing effort to improve our system of elections and restore confidence in them.